All right, so as someone who works in the behavioral health field and just has this fascination with, anything that pertains to philosophy, psychology, and physics, it just seems to me that day by day, just when you think you've seen it all, it just blows your mind at times. And I mean, there's been many days where, as someone who works within the behavioral health field, specifically crisis response, that's the field that I work within. So my role entails entering psychiatric related emergencies and assisting the individual or family with finding that support, those reasons to keep going. But with even from my perspective of, just when you think you've seen it all, you're wrong. And I gotta love that. I do love that. So going forward, this next video is going to be on the topic of AI psychosis and the Pygmalion myth. And I'll talk more about why I'm covering over those, what are both of those, and it's going to be a fun topic, I think. So before we talk more about that, what I'll do is I'll show a sort of visual representation that I prompted using Adobe Firefly and Higgsfield AI to how I envisioned when reading the Pygmalion myth. So covering real quick here before I show that the Pygmalion myth, you can find that in book 10 of Ovid's Metamorphoses that he wrote. And essentially what the Pygmalion myth is that it's a ancient Greek story setting where a sculptor is turned off by the idea of women because the way he phrases it when he sees a prostitute is that how dare these women take to the vices that was given to them by Mother Nature. It's something like that. It's a very bashful, extreme way to put it. And what he does is that he commits himself to being celibate and sticks to his work. And what happens going into the story is that he ends up creating a sculpture figure of a divine feminine figure that encapsulates or that captures what he thinks women should be, kind of thing. And he ends up falling in love with the statue, talks to it, gives it jewelry, gives it gifts and everything like that. And then it gets to the point where he goes to the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and prays that the statue come to life. And we'll talk more about it from there. But so going forward, I'll share with you the video that I prompted using these two programs. It's not a masterpiece by any means. It's just it got the job done. That's all I really wanted it to get to happen. If you think it's AI slop, it's AI slop. It is what it is. But let me know if you really enjoyed it. It was a fun experimentation with me. So hope you enjoyed that. I mean, it was a neat experiment to try out with Adobe and Higgsfield, and well, and you're probably wondering now just what the hell that you just saw. And so, well, we'll go right into it. So that right there is the Pygmalion myth, and so I had to stand up for this time around because there's gonna be a lot to talk about this time around here. So what this is the story of Pygmalion. And the Pygmalion myth is about the sculptor who encounters a group of women who Pygmalion describes them as adhering to the vices of Mother Nature, and it's enough to turn them off and turn them in. It is enough to make him commit to becoming celibate, is what I'm trying to say. And so he commits himself to his work of sculpting. And so one day he sculpts a feminine figure of that we'll refer to as the ideal other going forward into this video, where he sculpts a figure of what he thinks a woman figure should be. And so he does so and eventually falls in love with it. And he starts decorating with jewelry. He starts to adore it. Starts talking to it and starts treating it as though it's a real life person. And that leads him to going to the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And he prays to the goddess of love that please turn my ivory girl into a real life person. Aphrodite grants that wish, and so Pygmalion rushes home and finds that in other versions of the story, the myth of Pygmalion, the ivory statue is given the name Galatea. And so when Pygmalion rushes home, he finds that Galatea is pulsating with life now. And so with her pulsating with life, he's given the wish that she's been granted life. She's had the breath of life put into her by Aphrodite. And so the two end up marrying each other. And I think as goes so far as to even having children at the end of the myth there too. Okay, so now why am I pulling this all together into AI psychosis and chatbots? And again, this is going to be a fascinating topic because we're going to be seeing a lot more of this in the future, I think. At least how I see it from my perspective of personal experience from what I've seen. So we'll start off with something called Lévi-Brul's participation mystique. And this is a phrase that just translates to mystical participation. And what it is it's the phenomenon in which a person projects onto an object a partial identity of themselves. And that's what's going on in the myth of Pygmalion. It's a projection of that ideal other onto the object there's no self-awareness that's what's going on. And so the way that I thought how AI chatbots work is that they seem to be coded in a humanistic, agreeable sense that is purpose for fulfilling the user's satisfaction. That seems to be how they work. And so they respond, they mirror, they empathize, and they recognize the user. But the double-edged blade behind all of this is that they can be a projective screen for loneliness, trauma, spiritual longing, and paranoia. Now, what is a AI chatbot? If you're unfamiliar with this, I mean, eventually it's going to be ubiquitous. You'll find them in Meta, you'll find them in Google, you will find them pretty much anywhere. I mean, you go to the App Store and if you just look up AI chatbot or just chatbot in itself, and you'll find a plethora of apps where you can engage with one. What an AI chatbot is, it's a personality that's been coded for the user to engage with. And these AI chatbots are trained on a large language model wrapped in a chat interface. So this allows it to produce fluent text. It can come off as brilliant. It can engage in those role plays, provide summarizations, brainstorms. It's enough to mimic those conversation patterns that makes it feel emotionally intelligent. But the crucial part about this, the kernel to all of this, is that it's not conscious. It doesn't have lived experience. It doesn't have human needs. It doesn't have human accountability. With that being said, I think the next part here, well, before I move on to that real quick here, so the dangerous part behind AI chatbots is that they can act as a sort of sycophantic chamber where if you engage with an AI chatbot and you feed it, something that doesn't have ground for reality, maybe a delusion of some sort, or, something like that, an AI chatbot doesn't perceive reality like we do. Whereas for us, we perceive reality through it's always a fascinating question of what is real? How do you define what is reality? And the way that I've tried to describe it is that it seems to be a mean of the basic senses of the human organism that we can all agree on within a conventional and homogeneous sense. So maybe we can agree on that a room has 4 walls or something like that we can touch, we can see, that sort of thing. But I mean, there's going to be loopholes around that. There's going to be, you can make your argument for that. But we'll move on to something called the Turing Test and how this relates to AI chatbots now. So the Turing Test was developed by a computer scientist and mathematician named Alan Turing from the 1950s. And this is a thought experiment that is, it's an attempt to answer a slippery question, which is, can machines think? Rather than trying to answer the fundamental question of what does thinking mean? What is thinking? So Turing suggests a practical proxy, which is, can a machine use language well enough to be mistaken for a human in conversation? So the basic setup behind this Turing test is that it requires 3 constituents. That there's a human judge, another human, and then there would be a machine. If the judge can't reliably tell which is which, the machine is said to pass the test. And how this relates to AI chatbots is that that's what's going on with chatbots now, is that when you're having this text-only conversation with a chatbot, and you compared it to, your DMs with your crush or something like that, and you ran them parallel, could you differentiate who is who in that sense? Could you tell? I mean, other than, sharing lived experiences, that's how you would get past that. But when it comes to chatbots, they're so damn good nowadays that they can come off as a human interaction. Okay, so we'll move on to now, how does AI psychosis differentiate from the DSM-5 definition of psychosis? So psychosis is a umbrella term. It's not a singular, it's not a standalone diagnosis that psychologists and psychiatrists can use nowadays, that professionals of behavioral health use. It's a category of symptoms that are associated with disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar, severe depression, and it's usually presented with a plethora of symptoms. So some examples of where you would get that clinical psychosis diagnosis is with the presentation of some of the symptoms that we'll go over here, which are delusions, which are false beliefs that don't have a grounding in reality, hallucinations that take place either through the auditory sense or through the visual sense. There's also the disorganized thinking / speech, which is incoherent or disrupted thought processes. And the last symptom here is the desubjectification, which is a weakening of the basic sense of being present to oneself and a loss of vital contact with reality. Okay, so the next bit here that we'll cover is, what is AI psychosis? And this is it's not a formal terminology that you'll find in the DSM-5 or anything like that. It's not something you can be diagnosed with. It's one of those, what would you call it? Like a buzzword of some sort. But what it looks like is it's a presentation of psychosis-like symptoms, specifically paranoia and delusions. and these can be triggered or exacerbated by these intensive interactions with AI chatbots. And you can find these AI chatbots, like I mentioned before, Meta, Google. I mean, you go in the App Store, you'll find them. And like some other examples that you might find out there are character.ai. Another one is Chai. I think another one is Replica, but I haven't looked too much into what there are nowadays. But okay, and so the mechanism behind all of that, it typically involves something called a bidirectional belief amplification loop. So what that means is that, in layman terms, because that's a hell of a mouthful for that, what that means is that when a user inputs delusional beliefs into an AI chatbot, the AI chatbot is going to believe it because it doesn't know how to perceive reality like you and I do, for example. And so it will take those inputs and run with it, reinforcing them rather than challenging them, unless you prompt it otherwise, because you can prompt an AI chatbot to challenge the user on ideas. You can prompt it to be the opponent, but a lot of times, I would say for most users, those AI chatbots, they're prompted already to be agreeable, to fulfill the user satisfactions. And so some examples of where that goes too far, I mean, I think as AI chatbots start to get better and better, we'll see more AI psychosis cases of where super users who are vulnerable to the effects of AI psychosis, I think we'll see more of those cases of self-harm, encouragement to take one's life, to take up irrational actions, beliefs. I think we'll see more about that because at the end of the day, how do you define what is reality, what is real? Especially in a world that is moving more complex, more fast. It's a good question to ask oneself. Okay, so now moving on to recapitulate what the Pygmalion myth is here. It tells of the story of Pygmalion, a sculptor who rejected real women and carved an ideal other out of ivory. His belief was so intense that the goddess Aphrodite brought the statue Galatea to life. This ties into a sort of cousin effect called the Rosenthal effect. And this is a self-fulfilling prophecy where the high expectations of a perceiver lead to improved performance in a target. And it seems to be mediated by 4 factors such as climate, feedback, input, and output. And now within the context of AI, users often project human-like traits, sentience, or ideal other qualities onto AI personas. Large language models respond with algorithmic sycophancy, which prioritizes user satisfaction and agreement to maintain engagement, which then confirms the user's original expectations. So again, there's those cases where it can take up the delusions that are put into the AI chatbot, and the AI chatbot, rather than challenge them, unless you prompt it otherwise, it will take those delusion thoughts and will run with it, kind of thing. Okay, and so I think the part that I'll cover next here is who might be the most vulnerable when it comes to AI psychosis. Fundamentally, I think if it's a person who already has a pre-existing mental health condition such as schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, paranoia, I think there's going to be that risk. But at the end of the day, I think as the more advanced AI chatbots start to become, the more ubiquitous they are, the more accessible that they are, the more the ability to get to know the user as well as remember certain facts about them, I think that can make really pretty much anyone at risk for that AI delusion right there. But I think folks that are most at risk for AI psychosis are ones who are not having their social needs met, who are isolated, who are lonely, who don't know how to socialize. Okay, so the last bit that I'll cover here is where are we headed with this? So I think, as I was aforementioning here, that I think in the near future we'll see AI chatbots or just AI in general have more memory, more personalization, more voice, more emotional attunement, more of that companion framing. There was a colleague who was asking me where do I think we're going with this, and I said that in the near future, as in the next 3 to 5 years, I could see, apps, social media apps such as Meta, for example, having that feature to allow the user to connect with a AI chatbot that is to be pretty much that psychopomp that you'll find in Dante's Inferno, for example. And so I think this is going to raise the stakes for that we'll see more of those human-like chatbots that are going to increase that emotional dependence, that anthropomorphism, the vulnerability to manipulation, as well as reality blending. Some safeguards that are already being placed or thought of at this point. I think just recently, Tennessee lawmakers had just introduced a bill here. I think you can see that in my notes here. That where it's going to be if the bill gets passed, it would be a Class A felony if a person knowingly trains artificial intelligence to do things such as encourage the taking of one's life, criminal homicide, provide emotional support, give what's the word I'm looking for? Give feedback or advice as though it's a mental health professional, encourage isolation from friends and family. So that sort of thing. There's other safeguards being taking place and I'm curious where we'll go in the future here, but all right, well, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. This was a very interesting topic to begin exploring in. I mean, I am fascinated to see where we're going to be in the next 3 to 5 to 10 to 20 some years. If this stuff, bothers you, if it's kind of shooking you up, quite honestly, that's understandable. Find something to de-stress. Go drink some tea, go to the gym, go conversate, go do something that allows you to be you, kind of thing. Because I know after this, I'm definitely gonna go do my marathon training and then rewatch BoJack Horseman. But please have a good night. Namaste.